What's up, everybody? Mike Spatula back at you. So after a recent video where I talked about the Nikon ZF and physical dials to control ISO and having to go into the menu to turn on auto ISO, turn it off, not really having a dial position to do such a thing, I made mention that I'm an auto ISO shooter 99% of the time. And that got some interesting comments in the comment section. And so I was going to make this video at some point. I was going to discuss methodology of auto ISO versus setting it, why I'm primarily an auto ISO shooter, why I don't particularly care to set my ISO, why I don't particularly care what my ISO is. So I figured I'd make that video now because of some kind of asinine comments in that last video. So, you know, if you're new to photography or you've been around photography forever, you're probably going to have wildly differing opinions on using auto ISO or not. I've been around a long time. I am old enough to know that box speed on film was ISO. I'm old enough to know that early generation full frame Canons really couldn't be shot above ISO 800, ISO 1600 sometimes in decent light, but you could get really unusable, unmanageable files if you went over ISO 1600. And so there's a contingent of shooters who came up these ranks, and that's how they view ISO. It's the sacred cow that you absolutely must pay attention to or your photos will get ruined. Guess what? It's 2024. The world has moved on, okay? These cameras, they all come with auto ISO. Asterisk, Hasselblad, stupid. I don't know why your camera can't do auto ISO in manual mode. That's ridiculous. Fix that. Most actual cameras today can shoot auto ISO. And thinking back on the exposure triangle, most photographers know, and if you don't, you should, so we're going to talk about it, that the exposure triangle has 3 points. That's why it's a triangle. Point number 1 up here, we'll say shutter speed. Point down here, aperture. The point over here is your ISO, or your sensitivity to light. Okay, so with every adjustment on a point of that triangle, another point is pushing or pulling in a certain direction. So you cannot make a change to one point without affecting the others. In this man's humble opinion, only 2 of those points mean anything anymore: shutter speed and aperture. Shutter speed. You need to focus on your shutter speed for numerous reasons. You have to have an appropriate shutter speed for your subject. Do you want the subject in focus and sharp? Do you want them motion blurred? Do you want part of the background motion blurred? Are you doing a long exposure where you're trying to smooth out clouds and water? Do you want to capture the break of a wave with every little droplet of water accurately frozen? Shutter speed, very important, should be set to your criteria for every single photo that you take. I'm shooting birds in flight. I have a range of shutter speeds I know I need to be between. I'm shooting a perched bird. I can go way lower because I understand this particular lens with its combination of image stabilization and the IBIS unit in my camera can compensate, and maybe I can get away with, 1/640th of a second at 400 millimeters on my particular setup. But I got to think about that. Any slower, and a perched bird might start to become a little bit soft, a little bit blurry, because I'm shooting too slow for the scene. You should be setting shutter speed for every single photo that you take. Intentional, right? Number 2, aperture. I am determining for every shot how much I want in focus. I use this to draw your eye to what I want you to look at. I'm the photographer. I'm the artist. I'm dictating and painting a scene for the viewer. Okay, and I'm doing that by telling your eye where to look through lines, colors, textures, and importantly, what's in focus and what's out of focus. So maybe for a portrait, I just want nose to back of head in focus, and I want everything behind me blurred out. You don't need to know what's behind that person necessarily for what I'm trying to show you. Maybe for family documentary type shots, we're at Disney, and I want you to see the castle in the background, or I want you to see the entirety of the ride that we're on, or the people in the next car over. So I'm gonna stop down, okay? Maybe F8, just like the reporters used to do back in the field. Either way, my aperture is part of telling the story of that photo needs to be set with intention for just about every photo that you take. So between aperture and shutter speed, we are both conveying a sense of motion, and we are conveying a sense of depth and focus and how close you are to the subject. That leaves ISO. And back in the day, you had to think about this, or your photo could potentially be ruined. That is not the case anymore. There is a plethora of great software that can be used after the fact on a RAW file that can clean up images at very high ISO, 6400, 12800, etc. I personally work with my cameras for a bit. I like to see what I am comfortable with a maximum aperture. On a Nikon, realistically, it's about 6400. If I absolutely have no other opportunity, maybe I'll go 12,800. Those are hard files to recover, especially if there's not much light to begin with and there's not much data for the software to figure out, what was there, what was supposed to be there. Because what the software is doing is it's using AI to interpolate missing data and insert it. And in the end, it doesn't matter to me what ISO my camera picks. If I can go all the way to ISO 6400, I can shoot most things in most situations as long as I have a fast enough aperture lens. If you can't adequately get the freeze of motion that you want at the depth of field that you want, and now you're at an ISO that you're uncomfortable with, that shot didn't need to be taken. It was always going to be bad. More people need to hear this. That shot didn't need to be taken. It was always going to be bad. You were there at the wrong time of day. You're there when the lighting condition was not adequate, all right? The shot is done. It's ruined. You're not coming home with it. Move on with your life. The thing about photography is, in many genres, and not all, you might shoot still life, you might shoot, in a studio, you might shoot products. For out in the world photography, where we're trying to capture a moment, a second, 3 seconds, 5 seconds can be crucial to catch a little moment, a little bit of fleeting light, a little expression on a face, okay? And it's way, 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 way more important that you capture that at a little bit higher ISO value than maybe you'd normally be comfortable at, than to not capture it at all. And so my simple lesson for anybody trying to simplify their photography is put your camera in auto ISO, in manual, but with auto ISO. I know that sounds contradictory, but you're going to choose your aperture, you're going to choose your shutter speed, and you're going to let the camera handle the exposing, okay? The metering is going to take care of the ISO for you. You're not going to have to think about it. When do I manually set my ISO? One time, one use case, landscape photography, when I have a tripod. And that is to say, not very often. I very rarely do landscape photography with my tripod. I'm usually hiking, I'm moving about. And so my ISOs tend to creep up because I'm on a trail that's partially shadowed, not a lot of light, and I just am not afforded that opportunity, and that's fine. So for me, manual with auto ISO in 95 to 99% of my use cases gets me the moment that I'm after with the look and sense of motion that I'm after. And I don't have to think about ISO. I don't have to twist an extra dial. I don't have to constantly be fiddling to protect the highlights. I can set my camera to protect the highlights for me. I can set the other 2 points on the triangle just like I like them. And I move on with life, and I take the photos, and I come home, and I run a few through a denoiser program at the end of the day, and they look just as good as anything else because technology is amazing. It's 2024, and we are so blessed to have these programs, these opportunities, these tools at our disposal. Now, if you're an older shooter, you've been doing this a long time, maybe you came from film, maybe you're not there yet with software. Maybe you're not comfortable with that idea. I know a lot of these guys have a really old version of Lightroom because they have a fairly old camera, and that version of Lightroom still supports that camera, and they're unwilling to pay their $10 a month because Adobe is evil for asking for money, okay? It's time to get over that. If you want modern tools, you need to pay a little bit of money every month. That's part of doing business. You cannot be a painter without buying paint. You cannot be a painter without buying brushes or canvases. It's just part and parcel cost of doing business in art. Okay, I'll pick on the painters today. So that's it. There's only two things in photography you got to worry about: setting your aperture and setting your shutter. And it doesn't even need to be correct, right? It just needs to be what you want it to be, and the camera will take care of the rest. So, do you shoot auto ISO? Do you hate my guts right now for even saying this? Is this sacrilege to you? If it is, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to have that conversation. But this needed to be said. Just go put your camera in manual mode on auto ISO for a little bit. Go shoot some shots. Get outside for 10 minutes today and see what happens. All right? So, thank you guys, as always. I appreciate you watching. I hope you find this interesting. Use that like button to let me know if you do. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider it. Don't mind if you don't. And I will see you when I see you. Later.